What is this talk really about? I was very fortunate, like I said, to have some wonderful friends that were also very active in the Agile community that were interested in doing a deep dive into why we got to where we are in the Agile community. So we came up with a very harebrained idea to just ask the authors. You guys are very, very fortunate. You have John Kern here today and tomorrow doing the keynote, and he's one of those authors. And I love one of the quotes that I got from him when I first met him, basically, 4 measly bullets and all this shit happened. So that's really my favorite way to kick off this talk, is to just say that there was a group of folks that got together and they created an idea, basically a declaration of independence against the heavyweight process that was going on in our industry back then. And it really spun off beautiful, beautiful concepts and groups and things like this room here. So you all are part of that community just by being here. By the way, I don't speak Spanish, so all of these slides in Spanish, they're normally in English. This is going to be awesome. We're going to learn together how I can handle this. Never done this before. So at the end of this, hopefully there's 4 things that we can take away. What is the project? See, I had to actually read that and try to translate in my brain what that said. What was the project? How did it come about? How did we conduct it? If you're interested, where can you learn more? What are the actual secrets that we distilled out of this project? And I promise you, I'm going to give them to you straight away. What is it that the manifesto authors actually wanted to get into the community? What message did they have then, and what message do they still have now? We'll go through that. And then, because of what I do for a living, which is I help large companies, I consult with them, and I help them understand better ways of working, usually through a heavy technical lens. I work in DevOps and cloud primarily, but I leverage all of the Agile concepts in practice. So let's take this story that I'm talking through, this project that I'm talking through, and what does this actually mean as far as business value? How can you take this and make a difference in industry? When I gave this talk for the first time, it was right after the passing of Mike Beadle. I'm assuming folks in this room are familiar with Mike Beadle. He's one of the manifesto authors, and he probably, in some way, either directly or indirectly, touched every single person in this room. And Mike was unfortunately taken from us about a year ago now, and I like starting with just an audio clip of my interview with Mike.
What is if you could talk to the next generation of Agile practitioners and say the one thing that you want them to understand or to grab hold of and really take to the next level in the world of Agile, what would that thing be, or what advice would you give to this next generation?
So I would tell them, take this as take the Agile ideas and as a good starting point, a starting point that maybe get you further than what we had as management in the 20th century. But don't stop looking, keep innovating, even in fact keep questioning the techniques and keep questioning what's the right way. I mean, the only way to evolve eventually is to piggyback and stand in the shoulders of giants, right? So don't be afraid to take it down. If you do find good reasons to evolve it, to improve it, go ahead, right? And so don't stop here. Go take it further.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Mike.
So I love sharing that. I mean, Mike was a good guy, so glad we get to share that message a little further.
What is the...
Whoop. Perfect, just like I intended. Right, so the project itself. Anybody that gets a chance to know me will my stories either start or end at a bar. And this is one of those stories. So I had been going to a number of conferences, usually up in the U.S., and I saw the same group of folks, and we all seemed to talk about the same things, and they just happened to be from my general area in the United States. And we were sitting at the bar in Alistair Coburn's Heart of Agile conference, right outside of Philadelphia, as it happens. And after way too many drinks, It was a happy hour that went for 6 hours is the joke. We decided we're too far off center. How do we get back to the core of Agile? So we started doing some research, and it turns out there was no official record of anyone actually interviewing the authors. We were arrogant, and we decided that we would do that. And to our surprise, actually the first person we reached out to was John Kern. And almost immediately he came back with a response to the email and said, hell yes, I'm in. And we started the project. We started a podcast project. Again, showing my arrogance, we met John in person with 0 podcasting equipment. We took a cell phone, we put it on, it was in a bar, right John? Yeah, it was in a bar. And after a few beers we took a cell phone out, we put it on top of a beer glass, and we just hit the record. And we just started talking with John, and that set off a series of events where we then ended up speaking to 14 of the 17 Agile Manifesto authors. The only 3 that we have not gotten to yet, and I always say yet, are Kent Beck, Ward Cunningham, and Dave Thomas. All 3 were exceptionally polite in their response. All 3 of them said they were not interested in looking back. They were interested in looking forward. I don't take the first 17 no's, so there's still a chance. So these are the secrets. And this is usually when I need to, I know what the 3 are, so I don't need to translate this time. Technical practices, strong teams, and mindfulness. When I spoke to all 14 of these guys, their stories all synthesized into these 3 simple categories. Thematically, you can take almost anything we talked about and categorize it into those 3. There's hours of conversation that you can listen to with this voice talking to those guys if you want, or you can take my word for it. So let's step back a little bit. What was the Manifesto Conference? I'm sure a lot of you have gone through trainings, and a lot of you have read books, and you've heard about this. But we actually uncovered some artifacts during the conversation that seemed to be relevant at the time. So Andy Hunt actually gave us this picture. And if you notice, it wasn't called the Agile Manifesto Conference. It was actually called the Lightweight Methods Conference. The term Agile actually evolved and emerged in that 3-day session. One thing that's interesting too is the reason it's called they called it lightweight. At the time, there were a lot of heavyweight process that were very much involved in our industry. RUP being one of them, and waterfall and others like that, right? RUP being the rational unified process. I promised the translator I would spell out the acronyms. So this was an answer to that. It doesn't make sense to partition the work into giant chunks and do large batch process. So let's come up with the opposite of heavyweight. Lightweight, cool. Problem is, I don't know anyone that wants to be considered a lightweight, unless you're a boxer. So immediately they said, that's a bad title, bad label, let's figure out something later. And they figured out Agile during the process itself. Something else that was kind of interesting was when I spoke with John and the others, but John originally, and these are John's notes that he graciously, I think he scraped it from his attic after he spoke with us. There's about 5 pages of notes that are actually freely available. If you get those slides later, you can hit that URL and you'll get the full copy. I asked, why is it that you guys actually got together? How was it selected? Who was like the center hub of all of the spokes? And the too long don't read version of that is Bob Martin seemed to be the catalyst. He was the one that sort of had all the network and the social connections to make this happen. But the reason they got together is they were trying to be holistic. They wanted to invite everyone that had a lightweight method that was a thought leader in that space and bring them together. This was back in 2001. It was like pre-Facebook. You know, there wasn't a strong, other than IRC and like news groups and such, there wasn't a lot of like online collaboration. So most of these guys were meeting for the first time, with the exception of like the extreme programming guys. There's about 4 or 5 of those. They worked together, and then the Scrum guys. So you had Ken, Jeff, and Mike. They were very much involved in Scrum, so they knew each other. And John may have known some of them, but I don't know that you knew a whole lot of them. And then there was a couple really unique gentlemen like Ari von Bennekom. Has anyone ever heard of Ari before? Oh, do yourselves a favor and do some research on him. He's an interesting character. I don't know if I should actually share this, but either on the interview with Ari or after the interview with Ari, I asked him what his fondest memory of the manifesto event was, and his answer blew me away. He's from the Netherlands, and he flew over for this to Snowbird. So his most memorable thing is that his house burnt to the ground back in the Netherlands, and his wife left him. So that was Ari's takeaway from the Agile Manifesto. This is, I don't know why I obsess about this image, but this was another one from Andy, right? Yeah. I don't have a translation, but this is actually what we have all seen on the Agile Manifesto website, right? And if you look at it, this is, as far as I know, the earliest copy of what was written on a whiteboard. And what's most interesting to me is very little wording changed as they iterated, right? But if you look at the ordering, excuse me, if you look at the ordering over here, you can actually see the iterative process they went through to be mindful of the order the bullets actually came out in. But the one thing that stayed constant was individuals and interactions over process and tools. That is the one that never changed. And I think there's something meaningful about that. If you're going to make a statement, the first statement is the strongest. And being a DevOps practitioner, I can tell you that statement is never more true than today. In the world of how many DevOps people do I have here? Okay. So I'll just, you got 2 hands. I'm going to talk to you later. So most of you are going to have to take my word for this. In the world of DevOps, everyone thinks you can just buy some DevOps by getting some cool tools and licensing and slap it into a broken system, and automatically you're DevOps. Completely not true. So quickly, I'll go through some of the folks that we talked to, some of the names, right? And in the event that you're not familiar or you don't know the whole story, Bob Martin is he was an early extreme programming practitioner, and again, he was the catalyst, the guy that had all of the social connections to most everyone else, or he was once removed from everyone that was there. Bob has written a number of books, and I found out there's a new book forthcoming soon from him. He's very much a technologist at heart. Very interesting follow on Twitter. We also had Martin Fowler, and I talked about my arrogance early on. I'm generally pretty far up there. I was a fangirl when I talked to Martin Fowler. It was my first interaction with him, and I had a lot of respect for him. I've read almost all of his books, and I put him on a mental pedestal, and almost immediately he grounded that and made himself human. Martin is also an extreme programming practitioner. He's the chief scientist at ThoughtWorks, a agile and engineering consultancy, global consultancy. He's written a number of amazing books, and he actually just released, I should have an image of it. If you're into engineering, the refactoring book, top left, is the Bible. And he actually just re-released version 2, or edition 2. It is definitely worth a pickup and a read. Uh-oh. Andy Hunt, another practitioner. Oh. Okay. Sorry, guys. The good thing about the Agile community is that we can respond to change. Anybody know any good jokes? So, while we're waiting, we got 20 or 30 seconds. The front of the room obviously is much more entitled because we're getting to hear my voice, yeah? And then the back of the room's all wondering why we're laughing right now. Who, was that for me? Who here is familiar, pretty familiar with the manifesto story? Like these names and these faces, are these familiar to you guys? This is the first Scrum Day in Colombia. Who here is proud that they're at the first Scrum Day in Colombia? You guys have a beautiful country, a beautiful region, a beautiful city, and this is amazing. So I hope you all take a minute to actually appreciate how important you are for being here, how important this event is for your community, and how important the organizers and sponsors are for actually making this happen. So I apologize for going off script, but what script is there right now? So let's do this. All right. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move through these a little bit faster. Alistair, he is very unique. If you ever get an opportunity to have lunch with Alistair, do it. But what's important actually with Alistair, he has a movement that he's been working on for the last few years called the Heart of Agile. And he's talking about recentering the Agile movement to the core zone, to the heart, and figuring out what's important again. And a lot of the principles that I pulled away from these talks are very much aligned to what Alistair is working on now. He was a big supporter of this too, so he never actually thought that we were in competition or anything. James Grunning, who has used planning poker to do estimation? If you enjoy planning poker, this is the gentleman that created it. And here's the story behind planning poker. He was tired of having meetings where they spent the majority of the time talking about the things they agreed upon. Planning poker is meant to show the things that we disagree on, so we focus on where the value is. That's why we care about when we're estimating so far apart. He also does TDD for embedded C. So if anyone ever says that doing test-driven development for object-oriented languages is hard, have them read James's book. That's hard. This guy, he's a clown. You don't ever... No. So John is... I think I'm fortunate enough to not just say John is one of the Agile Manifesto authors, but he's also one of my friends. And he has a wealth of knowledge, and he challenges a lot of thinking. And, he was one of the early engineers with TogetherSoft and took that from a very small product to market and ultimately sold to Borland, and just brilliant man. So you guys are very much in line for a treat tomorrow in the morning keynote. Ron Jeffries is an interesting character as well, extreme programming practitioner. His son actually owns a brewery in the United States too, and his name is also Ron Jeffries, so a little bit of fun knowledge there. Right. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but we spoke to 14 of the 17. Some of these faces are probably more familiar, such as Jeff and Ken, Mike, and others. But if you're actually interested, all of the interviews are available. If you are a Scrum Alliance member and you're looking for your PSUs, SEUs, you need SEUs. This series is actually approved by the Scrum Alliance. You can accredit yourself with SEUs just by listening to this lovely, velvety, sweet-toned voice that my mother is so proud of. And if you're curious, in about 50% of the interviews, I was drinking, and I may have had some language slip out here and there. I've done so, I haven't cursed yet, have I? Ah, good. So let's dive into them. Technical practices. When I start thinking about technical practices, the first face that pops in my head is actually Bob Martin. And this is the point where reading in Spanish is doing me no good, but I think that says something about the best way for an engineer to become better is to be in service to a senior engineer. Bob's movement is very much centered on the art of the journey of the craftsman, being in service to the craft of engineering and becoming better because of that. When the next name that quickly jumps into my mind is Andy. And for my English-speaking friends, this says, Agile now means we do half of Scrum poorly and use Jira. And he's obviously being cynical. But what he's saying is we have lost our way, and a lot of organizations are doing Agile in name only. They're using Jira, and they're applying that as part of their Agile transformation. We're not focusing hard on the engineering concepts that are critical to the art of software. And others. So where these quotes sort of come from was there were some simple questions, and it was interesting. Fabian Schwartz, one of the organizers of today, it was giving a Scrum Master class yesterday, and I think some of those students are in the room, so they can actually vouch for this. And John and I stopped in. I think Richard came down as well, and we just let them ask us questions. And a lot of the questions the students asked in that yesterday's session were the same questions I asked in the interview series. So as you see these quotes, they're usually coming from things like, is there anything you would change? Are you going to do a manifesto 2.0? The exact same questions that came out yesterday. But my favorite question that elicited the majority of the quotes you're going to see today was, if you had a niece or a nephew or a family member that was about to enter the Agile community as a engineer, as a tester, as a Scrum Master, a product owner, what one thing would you wish for them? And a lot of the answers are what you're seeing here. Alistair talking about being in service to your teams. Come on now. God only knows what that says. Sorry, guys. This is the poor Spanish coming through. But I imagine James said something like, continue to hone your technical craft. Is that close? All right. Now, John, who's in the room again, and we're sitting in a big room, right? It's a very large room, probably with cars parked on top of us, and concrete, and steel, and plumbing, and electrical. We were sitting in a room not too different than this when I first met John, and that's where this quote came from. He said, "Thank God we do not build buildings the way that we build software. I'll be damned if I sat in this room if this was built using a lot of the Agile practices today." Now, for the engineers in the room, I know I've worked with teams in the past where we talk about technical practices that we believe to be important. Things like writing unit tests, things like refactoring our code, basically doing hygiene and things that are important in the art of software development. A lot of large organizations do not see value in those practices. When I talked to Ron about this, he came back with this brilliant quote where he said, I do not ask for permission to refactor my code or write a unit test any more than I ask for permission to write an if statement or a for loop. What he's saying there is, you don't ask permission to go to the bathroom at work because that's what you need. It's part of our biology. Part of the code's biology should be constant refactoring and constant testing. Improve the code. And your tests are part of your code, so you should refactor your tests as well. It's a cyclical thing. Strong teams, right? My guess is, given that we're at a Scrum conference, the majority of this room are Scrum practitioners, and you're on teams. The most beautiful thing in the world is when you see a strong team operating together. Hopefully, you're on one today, and if not, hopefully you get to be on one at some point in your career. There's nothing better. There's absolutely nothing better. You actually see people fall in love with what they do. It brings them joy. It brings them happiness, and they actually get to go through their life with a higher degree of satisfaction than going into a job that you absolutely hate, working with people that you don't respect. Does the term cargo cult translate well here, if I talk about a cargo cult? Okay. So what Martin is talking about is really more of the mimicking. We see what strong teams do, so we just pretend that we're doing those things, but it's a copy of a copy of a copy. And you end up losing in translation a lot of the value of Agile practices and of Scrum. Okay, another one. I should have a monitor that actually translates my own words for me. You ever write something yourself and then not know what you've written in front of 650 people? Hopefully the microphone's working so y'all can hear how bad that sounds. So, Martin again works at ThoughtWorks. I work for a company called Contino, and the way that Martin talks about ThoughtWorks is the way that I talk about my organization. I'm surrounded by the best engineers, the best coaches, the best consultants I've ever met in my life, and I'm actually in a fortunate position to hire. So whenever I meet someone that inspires me, I genuinely try to hire them. Martin talks about that with ThoughtWorks, and he says if you can find a group that makes you better, embrace that and love that and make yourself part of that group. And I say this knowing that it can be controversial, but if you're working at a place right now that you do not feel is helping you grow and doesn't actually embrace the same morals and values that you do as far as the way that you want to work, you really have two choices. You can either try to improve that situation, or you can quit. Right? I was in a 17-year cycle of working for organizations. I was trying to change from the inside, and then Contino came and found me, and now I actually get to help change those same organizations from the outside looking in. So, with any strong team, they're relentlessly looking to do two things: remove waste and consistently adapt. Learn from each other, learn from your systems, learn from your users. The only way that you get to do those things, and this is hypercritical in any group, any organization, any system, is feedback loops. You have to have honest feedback loops into the team so that the team can course correct and make data-driven decisions that allow them to improve. If you're familiar with Deming, he says if you can't measure it, you cannot improve it. So a lot of teams, the highest performing teams, are on a constant journey seeking out new numbers and new learnings from themselves, from their systems, from their users, and from their organization about how they can continuously improve and measure that improvement. Mindfulness. When I talk about mindfulness, it's a strange concept to a lot of organizations, and it's really just having sympathy and empathy for yourself. Well, I guess you can't really have empathy for yourself, can you? But having an understanding of your team, your system, your users, and actually having a deep desire to constantly seek out new learnings about those things, knowing that I'm not an individual on a Scrum team. This isn't Ryan's story. This isn't Ryan's task. This is a thing that has holistic involvement. Who here has gone to a stand-up where it's just an individual status meeting where we're waiting for our turn to talk? That is not a very mindful team. So if you're in that stance today, first of all, you're not alone. That happens probably in 70% of the Scrum teams that I see. You're not alone. But you alone can start to improve that. You can start to draw in more involvement, more inclusion, being mindful of how that's not helping the team move forward. Yep, don't know what that says. But oh boy, 10 minutes. All right, good thing. Since John's here, I'm going to leave this up and assume somebody that knows Spanish is getting something of value from this. All right, so these are the secrets. We talked about this on like slide 3, right? The problem is I am a horrible person and I lied to you. But I'll fix that, I promise you. We're going to talk through these, and then we're going to figure out what these secrets actually tell us. I like Indiana Jones, right? I like archaeologists that go out there and uncover things, and what we have are 3 clues that we're going to piece together and figure out what those clues mean together. But when we talk about strong teams, the teams need to make sure that they are the team every day that they want to be, and they're constantly improving towards that. You always need to be refactoring your team and refactoring your practices and making sure that you're getting stronger, right? When we talk about mindfulness, we want to create a deep desire to be better in service to each other, in service to our systems, in service to our team and to our users. And we talk about technical practices. Again, I always will lean first on the engineering aspects. That's just, my background. That's what I do every day. We need to continuously hone those technical skills. If you're a Scrum Master, if you're a product owner, and you don't understand the art of software creation, if you don't understand the extreme programming practices, that's fine. I don't expect my my product owners to sit down there and write new code, but I would expect them to have an understanding and an appreciation for the way that software gets developed. It's not just a meat grinder that you sit down and you crank out new lines of code. Something that I've said to a lot of teams, I've worked with a lot of managers. And one of their favorite metrics in some of these organizations is number of lines of code written. There's probably worse metrics, but there's not many worse metrics to gauge a team's performance on. I worked with a team, and this is a true story, where we took one function that was 10,000 lines of code, and we knocked it down to 300. So if I'm only getting incentivized by the number of lines of code written, that is a horrible decision. I am not incentivized to do that. But what I've just done is I created a much simpler function that is 100% covered under, 80% covered under test, and it's simple to read. Rather than 10,000 lines of a haystack with a needle in it, I now have something that's easier to parse. So technical practices are important. Understanding why engineers sometimes make the decisions they make is important, and realizing, how much work did you produce, output type actions. Those are oftentimes not actually breeding the best results. So here's where I correct my lie. When I think about the interaction between those three secrets, the people, the process, and the technology starts to emerge, those are what I believe are at the heart of the Agile Manifesto. How are we as humans? How do we communicate? How do we collaborate? How do we smash our silos? Process. How do we actually create value? What is that value stream? How do we attach our technical work? Actually, here's some really good free consulting. We oftentimes do not know how to speak to leadership. And by leadership, I mean our bosses, right? Very few CIOs, CEOs, CFOs, CTOs give a shit about stories. None of them. They don't care about stories. They probably don't even care about Scrum or Agile. They care about ROI. They care about TCO. They care about business value. So how do we actually take the things that we're creating, that we're actually pouring our heart into, we're not with our family to create these things, how do we actually show business value with those? So that's one of the things that's super critical. And then the technology itself, really drawing a deep appreciation for the technology. Technology changes all the time. So being in front of that and understanding how the technology complements the process. And ultimately, the process should complement the people. So what ends up happening is those things actually emerge. When you look at those secrets and you listen to the interviews, you hear that people, process, and technology become the heart of what the Agile Manifesto is going after when you speak to these guys. The technical practices, the technical practices continue to emerge as something that is an enabler of the process. But what you get at the heart of the people, process, technology pattern is flow. And if you've ever worked with a team where flow emerges, which is seamless transition from an idea, in Lean we call this concept to cash. But in Agile we tend to call this flow. How quickly can we get things through the value stream? I talked about DevOps a few times, and I never actually defined what DevOps is, right? For those that aren't familiar, the way that I define DevOps to anybody that doesn't understand, as long as they have basic engineering and project capabilities, think of all of the elements of creating software. We have an idea, we do some planning, we do some design, we do some development, we do some testing, we ultimately release it, and then we should be getting feedback from the system. So think about that. That's a simple SDLC that we probably are all familiar with. DevOps to me is anything that allows me to compress and slice that so that I can send things through that value stream faster and get feedback from my system. That is flow when we talk about flow. So anything teams can do to be in service to shrinking that value stream, instrumentation, and making data-driven decisions from those systems. Oh, and because I love to practice DevOps, whoops, too fast, Ryan. Because I like to practice, I'm a practitioner of DevOps. Okay, shocker, I consider all of this, the heart of Agile, to be DevOps. So, how does this actually apply, right? A lot of times, I've gone to talks, I've gone to trainings, and I hear these concepts, and a lot of times you get head nods, yeah, we know these things are good, yeah, this is great. Then you go back to your desk and you sit down and you get into your backlog or you have your product owner, or you have your boss, or your bugs, or your whatever pushing down on you, and you're like, well, shit, all these good ideas that I just heard don't apply to me because my context is different. So let me tell you a story. I have 5 minutes to tell it. Promise I can do this in about 10. I'm currently working with a very large multinational financial services organization, heavily regulated, right? They operate in commercial lending, they operate in trading, and they operate in retail banking. So pretty much the gamut, right? They have horrendous technical practices. They are New York, well, the U.S. operation is New York City based, which should be no surprise. I'm still working with them today. Well, not today, but we're still engaged. We sat with this team, and we employed almost all of the concepts that I'm talking about today with a team that was fundamentally broken. For the technologists in the room, they were using VDIs to do their build and their compilation, but they had to use Windows images, and they were deploying Docker containers. Okay, not many technologists in the room. That doesn't work. So the first thing we did was we spent a month convincing the management team that if you expect someone to be a mechanic in a garage to fix an engine, you have to give them tools. And the tools have to actually fit the nuts and the bolts on the engine. So we got rid of the VDIs and we actually rolled out MacBooks. And every engineer now had the tools to actually do their job. What that means is you get better ROI and faster time to value, which is exactly what we ended up doing. So this team in particular, in the first 6 weeks, we reduced their cycle time from 22 weeks for a major release down to 12, right? Where's it 10? Come on, Ryan. 22 to 12. That's for a major release. And we used a couple different concepts to do that. First and foremost, we gave them the right tools. We took away the VDI and we put them onto equipment that worked. Secondly, we introduced behavior-driven development, BDD. What that allowed was for us to have syntax between our ideas and our engineers. We talk in a way that the product owners can express value and the engineers can actually interpret requirements that is seamless. And then we constantly worked on making those BDD stories even smaller, like just packing them in even tighter. We also introduced test-driven development. No way I'm going to get through test-driven development here today, but TDD, it's basically writing your test before you write your code, so you can't compile until you've actually satisfied your test. It constrains what you're working on, but it also ensures that all new code is covered. Between those three elements principally, and we demonstrated what true Agile ceremonies look like by leading the way, and also heavy pair programming. If you ever have the opportunity as a technical person or a non-technical person to sit and pair with somebody, my God, I pair my conference talks. I pair everything because I really deeply appreciate the knowledge of others. We introduced these concepts and we got it down from 22 to 12. We also did some other technical things. It was a monolithic application, so we applied the strangler pattern to break off services into microservices. We created a bootstrapped framework that allowed for UI elements to be released independently. Why I tell you that 22 to 12 sounds great. What this team is doing in reality today, last Wednesday, we did 2 releases to production in real time. Those releases actually were same-day releases. We came up with the story in the morning, and we released in the afternoon. That would have taken 22 weeks 4 months ago. That's how you apply these concepts into practice. So, again, if technology works the way it's supposed to, and it does most of the time, these slides should have all just been tweeted. If you're interested, you can get them. If for some reason I had technical issues like I did on the stage, and they didn't tweet, just grab me. There's probably not too many bearded, bald, tattooed guys running around. It was my pleasure. I don't believe we have a lot of time for questions, but I want to say a couple quick things before I close. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your country. Thank you for bearing through some of the technical issues that we had. I believe after this we break off into the 3 different sessions. I believe Fabian Schwartz, I think, is up here. I will be hanging out for Fabian's talk. I encourage you all to figure out what talk best aligns with you. Feel free to chase me down. I'm more than happy to talk about anything today. Thank you, guys.